Thank you so much, Professor, for coming to this university and for staying with us for a few weeks and giving classes and lectures to the students of the university. We appreciate that very, very much. And let me ask you a couple of questions now. One thing I would like to ask you is about the interreligious dialogue. I think that when we are looking at this globalized world, we kind of realize that we, in a certain sense, develop different languages. I mean by that, say, business. We communicate globally, and there is some kind of business language that we use and operate. And perhaps there could be something like even entertainment language that kind of is understood globally. There's certainly culture in different cultures, and probably we are trying to find some way to develop some kind of language or communication regarding different cultures, how to feel, how to act when you're encountering someone from the different culture. And I think that would be also very important to develop some kind of language when it comes to the issue of different religions. And I'm not really quite sure as to where we are, so to speak, in that process. And the reason why I'm asking this is that I think that for many people in Europe and perhaps in North America, religion was something that was put or attempted to put very deep somewhere into your own subjectivity, something which was, I think, kind of taken out of the public space. And so perhaps there's really a need to work on some kind of dialect and some kind of language which would enable to live in that or live through that, say, religious dimension. What would you think about this?
There's many dimensions to your comment. First, let me just thank you and your colleagues here at Ukrainian Catholic University for the very warm welcome you've given me, and I want to say how much I'm enjoying my time among you. It's a delight for me to be with you.
Thank you.
The modern interreligious movement is often dated to the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, when there was a parliament of the world's religions. Now, obviously, there have been different conversations through the centuries in different places, like medieval Spain is one example, 8th century Baghdad is another. So there have been times in which people have come together, and the language would have varied according to the time and place. But much of the modern discussion has been shaped by English, and I don't say that at all chauvinistically, but the first international meeting on this global scale was in Chicago, when you had Hindus, Buddhists coming with Muslims and Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and on a public forum speaking together. One of the major concerns of that parliament was, how can we live together? So how can we present our own beliefs in a forum that's also respectful of others? And so the language there, basically the conversations took place in English, and that, I know, sets up a certain bias and has all kinds of problems. But in terms of the basis for dialogue, the Catholic Cardinal of Baltimore, Cardinal Gibbons, most prominent Catholic churchman of his day, said that he was not on a search for truth because he was confident he had found it in the Catholic Church. But, he said, the plane on which we meet each other is charity, love of neighbor. And he quoted the ancient pagan writer Cicero to that effect, that nowhere are we closer to the gods than when we show charity towards others. So this practical concern for alleviating suffering and enhancing the well-being of our neighbors has been one of the prominent threads. The next parliament was also in Chicago in 1993. I was part of the planning for that. And it was a physicist, Gerald Barney, who gave the keynote address. And first he gave a series of projections as a scientist about if current trends continue, there'll be all kinds of troubling developments in terms of water availability, land use, population growth, and this is exacerbated by interreligious conflicts where scarce resources are exhausted. And he framed a challenge to the leaders of the world's community, saying only religions have a tradition of challenging people to go against their short-term interest for the sake of longer goals. And so he challenged religious leaders to speak for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren in challenging the world to work together in areas. So in terms of the concerns, that's often been the language.
And kind of developing this or building on this, I would be very much interested in asking you about how your involvement in the interreligious dialogue, and you traveled extensively globally, how that influences you personally, you being a Catholic priest, and how that shapes or perhaps even builds in some regards your own kind of sense of identity and Christian identity. What would you reply to this?
My dialogue with the Jewish community has very much shaped the way I understand Jesus, his first followers in the New Testament. Through dialogue with Jews, I've had many wonderful experiences. When I was at Mundelein Seminary, we used to have priest-rabbi retreats where we would not only talk to each other, but pray together. And so with rabbis, I said psalms and I prayed the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, with rabbis. And so this gave me a deep sense of the rootedness of Jesus in the Jewish tradition. And that provides a context for understanding many of the conflict stories in the New Testament where Jesus is criticizing Jewish leaders. To appreciate that Jesus is a Jew puts it in the context of Jewish debates over halakha, over Jewish practice, which was typical of Judaism past and present. And then reading the later Christian tradition in dialogue with Jews, I've come to a fresh appreciation of how painful much of our history is with so many anti-Jewish attitudes, but also of the wonderful transformation that's taken place in recent decades in many areas where there's been greater understanding between Jews and Christians. With Buddhists, I've been very moved by the practice of meditation in the Buddhist tradition, and I've made various Buddhist meditation retreats where one is simply instructed to sit and follow one's breath, to be in the present moment. So it's not a matter of accepting any Buddhist doctrines, but of being very attentive to the experience right here, right now. And like many other Christians, I found that this can be a very beneficial exercise for appreciating themes in the Christian tradition. With Muslims, tragically, much of the dialogue in the United States in recent years has taken place in the shadow of the attacks of September 11th, 2001. I was already involved in dialogue with Muslims before that, and so fortunately I already had a background somewhat and knew wonderful Muslims in the United States who completely deplore the acts of terrorism that were committed in a certain misunderstanding of Islam. And these have been some of the most important dialogues for us in the United States to try to build a harmonious set of relationships among Jews, Christians, and Muslims so that we can live in mutual respect. And so this has been another major focus of my work.
Well, I think it's very much built in the very idea of Christianity, namely the idea of evangelization, so to speak, the idea of becoming a missioner who goes and spreads the word of truth. And that essentially, I think, presupposes that you think, that you believe that you got some truth that you would like to share with other people. And with this comes the whole idea of someone converting into say Christianity. I'm just wondering, given the present context, given the present situation and the interreligious dialogue, how that idea is applicable still.
Conversion can mean a person's change from following one religious path to another religious path. But there's another sense of conversion, rooted in the Greek word metanoia, that is an ongoing task for people, whether or not they change from one religious tradition to another. There's an ongoing conversion to truth, to goodness, an ongoing repentance for one's sins. And I think this is incumbent upon all of us in interreligious dialogue. For myself, I try to witness to my own faith as a Christian, honestly and openly with my dialogue partners, and I also respect their own witness of the way the truth has grasped them. I'm always mindful of the principles of Christian theology, going back to the ancient early Greek fathers and to Augustine, that we do not grasp the truth grasps us. Truth in itself is incomprehensible, and all our words, all our signs are pointers to a truth that ultimately is incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ. And so as Christians, we don't believe in formulas, even the words of the Creed. We believe in the reality to which these words point. And in dialogue with other traditions, often I found that other traditions have a similar perspective on their own claims. In Mahayana Buddhism, they talk about skillful means, where the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas use teachings not as ultimate dogmatic truth, but analogous to the healing medicine of a physician who gives different medicines to different people because they have different illnesses. And in both the Jewish and the Muslim and the Hindu traditions, there's a strong sense that we cannot capture truth in our formulas, but there's an ongoing process of being transformed by the experience of truth. And this is much of what we share in the dialogue.
Let me ask you finally one more question. And you spent 2 weeks, I believe, already here with us, here at Ukrainian Catholic University. And I'm just wondering, to the extent that you've sensed our atmosphere and to the extent that you've met our students and faculty, perhaps you could say a few words as to what you think this kind of institution could be doing in the years to come here in this country. In which way, if in any, Ukrainian Catholic University could be also contributing to the whole dimension of inter-religious dialogue in Ukraine and perhaps even globally.
I've been very impressed by the faculty and students that I've met in this last 2 weeks here. And so what you are doing here at Ukrainian Catholic University gives me tremendous hope for the future. To me, to be involved in interreligious dialogue means to be both deeply rooted in one's own religious and national heritage, and also open to sharing the gifts of one's heritage to others and receiving gifts. And so I would say the beginning would be to explore the interreligious dimension of the history of the different peoples who have lived in this territory that today is Ukraine. And I realize this is a very complex and shifting history with much tragedy in the 20th century. And so I would look to scholars here to really probe this whole heritage, both for positive and for negative aspects of it, to learn from that and then to share that with others. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions, and we're tentatively making plans to have our next Parliament in Brussels in August of 2014. And so I would invite you here at Ukrainian Catholic University to consider not only sending delegation there to represent you, but also here in Lviv in the coming years to possibly sponsor some type of events in conjunction with the coming Parliament that would explore aspects of your interreligious heritage.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for coming here, for your very good words about the Ukrainian Catholic University and our faculty, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for this conversation as well.
Pleasure being with you.
Thank you so much.